So, welcome. It was great to hear Ez's list of all the things that design touch. I love this broad view of design. And design obviously has a lot to answer for. And also a lot of challenges. When we saw the picture of the children activists out demonstrating, one of the placards said, "Design for future generations." You know, it's a kind of call to arms. And I love it that this Biennale promises to be an activist Biennale, one that calls for the resonance, for designers to be attuned to their responsibilities and the urgency of the situation. I was the founding director of the first Biennale and the artistic director of the second. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about both those events and show you some of the highlights from those editions. And we've got a few of the participants here from those editions who will tell you about their individual and national contributions. But before then, I just want to tell you a little bit about the context of those two editions, the first of which celebrated the 500th anniversary of the publication of Sir Thomas More's classic work of political philosophy. The theme was Utopia by Design. And we presented the challenge to designers to think of alternative futures, maybe cautionary futures, and to show those in their installations. We expected 20 countries to take part in the first edition, and we actually got 36. There was a fantastic response, and we had all 6 continents represented. Well, actually, there are 7, and it's amazing to hear that Antarctica, the Polar Research Institute, will be also involved in this one. So there will be 7 continents in 2020. The Biennale is a true global platform. It's not just about quantity, it's the quality, as well as the V&A, who did the UK national contribution. The Cooper Hewitt from New York did the American, the MAC, the Austrian. There was the Moscow Design Museum representing Russia, the Triennale Museum representing Italy, and the Japan Foundation representing Japan. And there were lots of very distinguished names in that first edition, like Konstantin Gercik and Mackingham Bay from the Netherlands and Autobahn from Turkey. Utopian has become something of a dirty word, a bit like unicorn, a realm of escapist fantasy and woolly thinking. And I think it's great to hear about the call for this Biennale to be about climate change, because sustainability has also, I think, become a bit of a dirty word. There's powerful lobbies that make people switch off when they hear about the sustainable, and obviously that's going to change, and there seems to be a tide behind that movement. We invited design teams to interrogate the history of the utopian idea and envisage some of the fundamental issues faced by humanity, big national and global issues, and to see if they could suggest, using design, some solutions to those big issues. And we encourage designers to tell stories about alternative futures, to ask questions, to ask big questions, and show design's power to strike up an informed debate and to act as a catalyst. So if we could start with the slides. This is Sir Thomas More's frontispiece to Utopia. You can see the skull hidden within the image. There was an idea that Utopia was almost like a vanitas idea, something that was only possible after death. Paradise was only attainable after you die. But the message seemed to be that you should die trying to reach utopia. Next slide. So we heard a lot about the city and the benefits of the compact city. The philosopher and sociologist Lewis Mumford said that the city was the first utopia. And at the Biennale, Mexico chose to look at our urban futures. Many countries chose to look at our urban futures. And in this high-tech installation, Fernando Romero looked at Paul Romer's idea of the charter city, sustainable tax and car-free zones that Fernando Romero imagined placed along the border of Mexico. Obviously, the border of Mexico, they're building very different structures there to charter cities. Not that charter cities are any less controversial, but we brought that debate to the Biennale. Do I have a clicker? Can I do this myself, or am I dependent on you? Thank you. free to click. So this was the Lebanese entry, which took over the riverside terrace of Somerset House and recreated the sort of utopia of the street. There was everything here from a barber's shop to a pomegranate stand. And the idea was that utopia is there in this kind of, in this culture of the street. It's there for you to glimpse in the everyday. Some countries took more of a historical line and looked at the failed modernist utopias of the past, such as the Russian entry, where they presented this amazing archive from the Institute of Technological Aesthetics that showed a whole load of utopian designs from the Soviet era, and a very different utopia from the kind of the Western ones. It showed what design was like behind the Iron Curtain. Chile also chose to look back at Allende's presidency in the early 70s, and they recreated this almost like Stanley Kubrick Space Odyssey style space that was a collaboration with the British cybernetician Stafford Beer. And in this room, Allende hoped to control the economy in real time. Indonesia looked at the Asian African Forum from the 1950s, and specifically the Bandung Charter, which sought to bring together the population from a quarter of the Earth's surface. And they imagined what would have happened if that Bandung Charter had actually come about. Austria was more conceptual. They looked at how fragile the concept of utopia is. As you approached it, sensors in this piece started to wobble, showing how an ideal structure starts to go awry as people are involved in it. This was Albania's entry, an outdoor piece in stainless steel that showed how political systems had utopia as the kind of void of their philosophies. And we've heard a lot about environmental resonance earlier, and Australia looked at the problem of ocean plastics. And after a visit to the Cocos Islands, which are very remote but completely plastic strewn, the Australian designer harvested some of these microplastics to create new designs. And this table created from microplastics was bought by the National Gallery of Victoria. And some of the installations were just fun. This was Autobahn's installation for Turkey. And they invited visitors to write messages and put them in this structure of pneumatic tubes. And they would hurtle around Somerset House, around all the corridors, and then end up in a wishing well of utopian hopes. So the second edition of the Biennale was devoted to emotional states. And we hope to build on the great success of the first one, but we had the awkward thing of second album syndrome. There was a lot of pressure on this one. We obviously live in emotionally turbulent and politically polarized times, and the choice of the theme was intended to reflect and confront that. We wanted to survey the global mood through the medium of design, and also put the visitor at the center of the experience by encouraging designers to come up with immersive, interactive installations that really engaged an audience at an emotional as well as an intellectual level. And we found in 2016 those were the most successful installations. The theme was inspired by Darwin's work on emotions. Darwin contested that emotions were a universal language that transcended borders and are recognized by everyone. And in his book, The Expressions of Emotion in Man and Animal, he sought to show the continuity, the evolutionary continuity in our expressions of emotion. And for this Biennale, we wanted to broaden the debate from issues of aesthetics and consumerism. A lot of the literature about design and emotions relates to how to make people identify with things, how to sell things. And we wanted to broaden that up to encourage countries to explore the idiosyncrasies of their particular design story in interesting and unexpected ways. And obviously good, socially responsible design can help foster a sense of community and ask questions about what people need for their well-being and many exhibits of the Biennale explored what these might be. But as made clear in her manifesto earlier, design can also divide us, and those issues were raised here too. Can't really see these pictures, but here we go. Guatemala celebrated the community action currently taking place in Santa Catarina, Palalpo, a town situated on the volcanic back shores of Lake Atalan. And this community is reinventing itself by painting the town in colors inspired by Mayan textiles. And that was explored in that sort of engineering of civic pride was explored in the Guatemalan entry, which won one of the medals last year. In a multimedia installation, China examined the cultural memories and symbolism that surrounded the double-decker Nanjing Yangtze River Bridge, which is 4 miles long and celebrated its 50th anniversary that year. It's a political monument that, engineered without foreign help, was one of the most recognized achievements of the Cultural Revolution. Australia's rainbow light installation, in its shimmering luminescence, was intended to indicate love and celebrated the Australian Parliament's legalization of same-sex marriage. And Poland looked back at its national history by presenting 10 objects which were innocent in themselves but very emotionally charged, including a plate of bagels invented in the ghettos that were cleared by the Nazis, and an 80s payphone that during the Soviet era would begin each call with a recorded message advertising that your conversation was being monitored by the military police. Israel explored rapid response design, setting up a sort of crisis room, and enlisting teams of designers to present design solutions to events in the daily news cycle in both their country and beyond. And the results were displayed in a sort of makeshift operations room, and visitors were encouraged to join the discussion. We heard about heritage earlier, and for the UK, forensic architecture took design to conflict zones, creating a DIY toolkit using kites, water bottles, and mobile phones that citizens could use to digitally scan sites of cultural iconoclasm and other violations. And this research project presented here, curated by the V&A, documents the testing of this kit by Yazidi volunteers in the Sinjar region of northern Iraq. And the Yazidi were a minority that were the victims of genocide perpetrated by ISIS. And in the courtyard, Greece presented a kinetic wall which divided the courtyard and was supposed to conjure up a mood of civil disobedience. In fact, the audience queued in a very orderly fashion to go through this popular piece. But it showed that walls don't necessarily have to divide, but can also be invitations. And the USA looked at data and facial recognition technology, showing how we're becoming ensnared in the gargantuan infrastructure and complex algorithms that we've created. Can such technology, they seem to ask, possibly be renounced, resisted, or even just made slightly more congenial? And design is at the crux of these emotional questions of artificial intelligence, ethics, sustainability, waste, even our survival as a species. And I think the London Design Biennale has introduced something really exciting here. You know, we've advocated a broad vision of design, which isn't just about sofas and chairs, but can contribute to the discussion of real-world issues and do that in an entertaining way. You know, we're not evangelists who think design can save the world, but let's hope that in a small way we can help ensure that this attitude of inclusiveness and international creative and cultural exchange can continue and grow and grow. And it's great that under Devlin's tenure, this is going to happen. So I'd like to first invite the Latvian ambassador up to talk about the Latvian installation. Here's the clicker.
Everybody on the stage.
You can do it wherever you like.
I will just sit. Shall we have everyone? Let's have everybody on the stage. Otherwise,
okay, let's change it.
Otherwise, musical chairs. All right, you'll be seeing pictures, and I will speak on a slightly different angle. So my name is Baiba Braze, I'm Latvian ambassador. And first we met with Christopher in the Lebanese pavilion in the first edition of the Design Biennale, and I think there is a memorable picture with us and watermelons under our arms as a result of that meeting.
Please delete that one.
Anyway, why did Latvia choose to participate in the London Design Biennale? Well, there were a couple of aspects that we looked at. First, we wanted something that was quite conceptual. We checked out the first edition that had a good place physically in London. Somerset House it ensured high visitor numbers. Of course, there was a professional and very good team that facilitated the participation, and it was less commercial, and it was more distinct than some of the other design events in London with which the city is so saturated with. So that was the focus of our interest. Plus, Latvia was celebrating 100 years, so it was the first big anniversary of the Republic of Latvia last year, so we decided to go for it. So we pitched in early, and it worked out quite successfully. There was a good concept by Artur Sanalts. You will be seeing pictures gradually, if we can move on. I don't know who is doing that, but...
There's only one picture.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, there's only one.
I think there's only one. You don't have so many pictures. You have to move back. But you can describe the piece from this picture.
Okay, this is quite enough. All right. We did actually send the whole presentation, but right. So there was the pictures that you see is actually the glass sort of panel. And so it was a very clear and high quality concept by Artur Sanalts. And there was a good curator, Latvian Design Museums, that did the whole sort of support function within Latvia and also connected with the V&A and other institutions. And it also felt we sort of resonated with the issues that we saw around us. And this concept was quite successful because we won the gold medal for the best design last year. And we felt it presented what Latvians are, clean, modern, innovative, sort of creative society, introvert as individuals, but quite a strong force collectively, despite being a small nation with a big territory. It also showed something that is so dear to us, environment and nature, because this glass panel in the color of Latvia's forests. The forests cover 52% of Latvia's territory. It's our biggest economic export. It's a very important industry. And we all sort of feel really connected in our DNA with the forest and the nature. And there was the glass was created in such a way that the gas turned into liquid on the surface of it. So everyone could leave messages on it. And that was the reason why it resonated. And as some people explained to us later, this type of moment of reflection is the same what we have in every day of our societies, where there are messages, where there are all types of communications, that's short term, and then other forces and people take over whatever we leave, in the public sphere, whether we speak or whether we talk or whether we communicate. So this allowed people to sort of physically connect and create the messaging, and seeing how it disappears and wait for it felt like a pause, what we all need. So at the end, it was one of the most popular pavilions, from what I understand, at the Biennale. And what it created for us, for Latvia, was the resonance that we wanted. It was a very strong, empowering message for the young generation of designers in Latvia, because the fact that the gold medal was awarded was widely reflected within Latvia. It created international resonance for Latvia. There were more than 100 international publications writing, or in a printed version. There were thousands of internet mentions, tens and hundreds of thousands of imprints on social media and internet. It created the necessary connections, of course, among the institutions participating in the Biennale. There was high quality institutions representing other countries. So it created the professional network, it created the network of designers, and of course for the country name of Latvia, it was very positive. So currently we are discussing what is our sort of next step. Shall we participate in the LDB next year? The majority think we should. How should we do it? Because quite clear, we are not going to get the gold medal again. So
you might do.
So, why bother?
You could speak to Jessica Ennis about that.
Yeah. We can have a special medal for Latvia.
There's a sort of whole discussion, among the institutions and people, how can we come up with something so special? But the themes that is dominating in the discussion of the design is very much the themes that Artur's reflected in his work in the Matter to Matter, is the fragility of our societies and the responsibility of the individual, because we all are responsible for ourselves in a ways that we have to be quite clear-headed in terms of what information we take in, how we work with that information about our actions on an everyday basis, be it on the plastic, be it on other issues. And in the same time, we are very fragile because we are so connected as we had never been before. And that type of pressures that builds on each one as individuals and on societies, of course, we are not sure where it's leading. So the individual responsibility with the fragility of the societies makes us all think that we have to create and understandably be responsible for each of our own action, and that will make us stronger as a society, as a democracy that we are in. And I think that is what the discussion is currently in Latvia, and from what I see also elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope I fitted in the 5 minutes.
So next we've got Jay Osgerby, who represented the UK at the first edition with I think the largest piece that the London Design Biennale ever had. Ta-da!
To date.
To date, a challenge.
Thank you very much. So you have to excuse me. Before I get on to talking about the design, which I can do without notes, I've made a few notes about things like why me and why do it. So after the thank you, why me? Well, I'm here because of, as you've just explained, we did the very first. We were lucky enough to be asked, in fact, to participate in the first Biennale. And me in the studio, or Ed and I in the studio, were responsible for creating Forecast, the piece that you see behind me. And at the time, and it's still today, I think it's worth asking ourselves as designers, why get involved in these things? What's the point? Why stop the studio to do something of this nature? And I think when I'm thinking about it, I think the answers to that are that as designers, I think we anticipate change. We don't always realize what we can do. We do anticipate change. We do have the power to influence and educate. We're also non-linear thinkers, most of us, well, I certainly am anyway. And in a way, that's one of the best skills that we have in that confronted with a problem, we don't see the answer, but we search it through creativity. But more than anything, we're storytellers. And I think that's what's unusual about the Biennale, because it gives us the opportunity. It's very difficult to have glasses when you can't read like this, so I have to do this. I need to get those kind of old person glasses that you can do both things. This isn't our day job. This isn't about promotion. It's not about sofas and lights, as you said. This is about something different. It's about using our skills to translate, contextualize, comment, and create. And using these things, these creations, we can create a forum to tackle social issues, and we can pose questions, open-ended questions, which don't need to be answered by an engineer or a shop. So we're trying to ask in our installation, where should we go as a nation? What are we doing? To try and provoke a debate. And I think that the Biennale can provoke the debate about unity through difference. And that's what I particularly loved about it, was the fact that we're encouraging diversity and different ways of seeing things. And I also like the themes which have worked. And in our case, it was utopia. And in our case, this idea of utopia gave us this really fantastic narrative to try and create a story about the UK. And as you can see behind us in the image, the sculpture that we created was a passive, so non-digital instrument, which really talked about or at least in our minds, talked about two really important things: the past and our kind of reliance on the sea to explore the world and for the world to explore us, and how those influences have come here and how we've travelled. Of course, that's pertinent to Utopia, Thomas More's creation of this island, which is only accessible by sea. So in talking about the past and our kind of seafaring heritage and our reliance on wind, it tied in so well to us as a nation and our current dominance in the generation of offshore electricity through wind farms, which is so exciting at the moment that you're getting these updates on your phone to say, today we haven't used coal since Thursday, you know, and even those small things, which aren't small, I know they're vast, they're so exciting. They're transformative. So that was that was us trying to link this kind of past with the future. But more than that, you know, there are other sort of slightly more tongue-in-cheek aspects, like if you know anybody from England or Britain, the very first thing you'll talk about is the bloody weather, right? It's an obsession. It's our icebreaker. It's, you know, 1,000 years of ice breaking. Because we have this weather, it gives us the introduction, and I do it every day. And the other key thing, I think, for us, was it gave us the opportunity to be slightly political, in that, you know, this Biennale followed on the footsteps from the June the 26th Brexit referendum in 2016. As you can remember, I'm sure you all remember, and live it in a daily hell, that we suddenly found ourselves in this rudderless world of political turmoil and change. And in a way, we wanted to characterize that in this object. And by creating something which is, in a way, passive, sculptural, and open to interpretation, it enables us to have those conversations. And I was just to comment on Ez's kind of plans for 2020, really. This was actually built, and British Land supported this and were incredibly generous in the sense that we created this to last. So this is a piece which has a long, long life cycle. We're hoping to reinstall it this year, just outside London. So that's it for me, I think.
Great,
so
thank you. So last we have Priya Khanchandani, who is going to talk about the Indian pavilion.
Oh, I forgot about the video.
Oh, there you go. Go and watch the video.
You stay behind
it
after,
turns.
actually. That would have made it so much more exciting, wouldn't it? There you go. You don't really have to watch it now.
I was quite enjoying that.
Oh, yeah.
But we'll move on.
Okay.
No, if you stay behind after assembly, we'll talk about that.
Okay, great. So the Indian pavilion.
Hi, I'm Priya Khanchandani. I think I'm listed on the programme as editor of Icon magazine. At the time that the plans for this Biennale kicked off, I was working for the British Council and curating the UK-India Year of Culture based out in Delhi, which is how I came to be interested in the prospect of curating the India Pavilion at London Design Biennale, kind of bringing together, I suppose, my two places of origin, in a sense. And it was, I guess the main challenge was to try to make a project happen that I knew quite early on wasn't going to have the backing of the Indian government, unlike many of the other countries represented in the Biennale. And it was thanks to, I think, a meeting that I had with Chris at the Saatchi Gallery, along with the Gujral, Feroz Gujral of the Gujral Foundation, that really made this project possible, and I'm really grateful to them for their involvement. So I'm here to say a bit about kind of resonance, I suppose, in the context of my work on the India Pavilion, and partly in the sense of the emotional resonance of the installation, but also the resonance of the themes that I had the chance to explore to do with kind of decolonizing design, which has become really essential to my work, both before and but I've been able to develop it further since then. So to start with the pavilion, which you can see here, the India Pavilion told the story of indigo, which we chose as a subject because we felt it was synonymous really with India's identity and its design history. It's a rare pigment. It was first found in India, interestingly, and was used in India for centuries to dye fabric, repel insects. There's even an entire city in the north of India decorated in indigo. In terms of its sort of emotional resonance, indigo is really a very evocative and alluring colour. It's an inky blue. I'm obviously only wearing it incidentally, not on purpose, with very deep tones. It appears in Ellington's Lovelorn Blues and The Dying Stages of a Bruise. When I was invited to create it, the India Pavilion, we thought long and hard about how to do justice to the intensity of this colour with such a long history, and in terms of how to reflect India's identity as a nation, such a huge and multifarious nation, through this singular colour. The result was this installation called State of Indigo, which was a multi-channel film and sound installation which took visitors into the labour-intensive setting of an indigo farm, which is where workers used to farm natural dye. Clearly now it's been largely superseded by synthetic dye, but it has a very specific history because during colonial times, which obviously India was subject to 200 years of British rule, farmers were forced to make indigo as part of their produce under quite oppressive conditions. Eventually, this led to the Indigo Revolts, and there's some quite poignant stories around it, which is why it was important to us that this was a sort of emotional experience. In one report that the British produced after the Indigo Revolts, it was said that no indigo box dispatched back to England was without a smear of blood. So in the installation, a set of projected images which kind of juxtapose archival footage of one of the last indigo farms in India, natural indigo farms, with contemporary graphics, places the visitor into a virtual trough where indigo leaves are being crushed during the process of creating dye, releasing this deep blue colour. Standing in the space, the toil of the labourers is meant to resonate with us emotionally. We're encouraged to experience the plight of the farmers as the pigment kind of engulfs us. I suppose their labour is sort of a metaphor for the oppression that India endured during colonial rule, and its recreation in a gallery is supposed to represent a kind of catharsis for a nation once subject to various levels of suffering under that regime. It was a story that was important. This is a sort of close-up of the indigo farmers, and which we've juxtaposed over various different graphics. But yeah, essentially, this is a story I kind of wanted to tell in the context of an international Biennale, and London Design Biennale is such an incredible opportunity to do this, as often in international cultural settings. Stories such as Empire, often outshadowed by more kind of Euro-Western readings of design history. And as a curator, it was important to me to tackle the sensitivities of this subject directly, as often histories of the other can be absent, as I said, from design histories. And I thought it was really positive that this sort of a story was welcome at London Design Biennale and could be told in the context of lots of other international stories. I was also conscious that the story sort of already belonged to India, and I felt it was important that it resonated here in London for an international audience. So just a couple of projects that I've done kind of before and after that link in with this, and I thought it would be interesting to talk about. One was that the themes I explored in the India Pavilion have resonated in my work both before and after the Biennale. Before, I had kind of co-founded Museum Detox, which is a pro-diversity collective, and we do a lot of work around decolonising the museum, and now have over 200 members. And I think that work was really, really vital kind of precursor to what came of the Biennale. Since then, I furthered my kind of decolonising design work as editor of Icon, when I produced this issue about decolonising design, and the cover story was about tropical modernism and its origins in colonial history, because of course colonisers went to tropical countries and built modernist architecture, and the kind of proliferation of this sort of palm print wallpaper today reveals a darker story that we wanted to tell. Just one other project was a book contribution I did. It was a book published by Delphina Foundation called A Selective Guide to the V&A South Asia Collection, in which I rewrote the panel text to the South Asia Gallery at the V&A from a sort of decolonised lens. And if anyone's interested, I'd be happy to show you a copy of that later, but I won't read it out to you right now. And kind of finally, I'm working on a future exhibition along with architect Sam Jacob to do with decolonising Owen Jones's patterns, which we're planning to exhibit at Lisbon Triennale this autumn.
Great, thank you. So time for a few questions. Baiba, I just want to ask you, Jay mentioned the Brexit, and obviously the last two editions have been Brexit Biennales,
I'm
rather.
very sorry that I brought that up. But
No, it's good to bring it up. How do you reconcile the ecological concern that we've heard so much about today with the political nihilism of the current regimes?
I wanted the B word to be only about Biennale today, so not about the stuff that we have spoken so much about. At the end, the way we think is that we have to think through maintaining the connections. I mean, at the end, we are all democracies. We are all free individuals. We are all kind of mature societies. And this is what we have to concentrate on. So we have to consciously look beyond and above the political sort of unicorn promises and things that are there, and to come out on a rational relationship basis. And that will be not so much about ecology, I think, but about the maturity of the political systems and the limitation of egos, I'm afraid.
I mean, I think I know, speaking as a kind of creative person, I suppose, or somebody in the creative industries, that this kind of political isolationism and this kind of retrograde step won't affect us, actually, because we're a network of free-thinking people, and it doesn't really matter how ghettoized they'll try and make us and inward-looking, we won't be those people. So through us, and I think through the Biennale itself and others like it, we can keep holding hands across the world in that level, to keep that discourse going, and to make a point that we were open to external influence. We actually want to promote kind of diversity and the exchange of ideas. And this, London's always been the centre of this kind of confluence of ideas, cultures, inspiration, everything, economic turmoil even. And sometimes that's actually been a real benefit for us.
Yeah.
So I'm not, whilst I'm irritated by it, I don't think it's the end of the world, whatever happens. I think that we have enough energy and positivity to make the best of it.
Okay, thank you. Your installation, the Latvian installation, went on view in Riga and had an afterlife there. You're considering a new iteration in India, and yours is about to go on permanent view outside of London, as you mentioned. How important is it that these projects have a legacy outside of the Biennale?
Well, I think it's essential. I read what Ez wrote for next year, actually, and I loved what you said about the fact that we're creating these things to celebrate or to discuss the very thing that we're here. In other words, we're building these kind of totems to discuss the subject of sustainability, but in doing so, we're creating the problem. So it's like self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's essential. You can't do it anymore. And actually, it goes for all design and what we all
It's
do.
the same for us. It was very important to bring it back to Latvia. So the panels that you saw was just one part of the design pavilion. There was also a seat made from the Latvian woods in the proportions of the woods in Latvian forests, depending, how the percentage of oaks and the other trees, birch and so on that you have. That has been already put in the permanent collection of Latvian Design Museum. And the panel has been sort of traveling around, which reflects also in a way the idea of it, that it's a permanence, meaning that it's a structure, but it's impermanent because of the messages that are maintained, that allow people to create the emotions right then and right there, and then to reflect about them. So this sort of engagement, whether that was in London, whether that was in Riga, where it attracted the record amount of visitors when it was exhibited, was something that I think resonated again, both individually and internationally.
One more quick question for you, Priya.
Sorry, I have to finish.
India, famously, this was the first year that they were represented at the Venice Biennale. How important do you think these international events are for a country like India? How much political support did you get in curating your piece?
I mean, as I mentioned at the outset, it was very challenging for me to engage the Indian government to support this kind of project, or indeed any other non-profit cultural initiative. But I think that made it even more imperative that we found a way for India to be represented. Such an important nation, and particularly in the context of Biennale in London, has such a long history with the UK, and for its voice to be absent felt inappropriate almost, especially since India collections in UK national museums are so dominant. For it to be absent from a contemporary Biennale seems somehow wrong. But it is ultimately a shame that there isn't that support in the way that you clearly are so supportive of Latvian culture being showcased internationally, which is brilliant.
We gave freedom to the designer to create what he wanted.
Yeah, and in India, a lot of the innovative work's happening thanks to private foundations. Yeah. And that was the case with the Biennale, which was supported by the Kiran Nada Foundation. And in the past, Gujral Foundation has also supported projects in Venice and elsewhere.
Yeah. Baiba, you described yourself as an introvert. I think you're the most extrovert ambassador I met on my tour. You're a real dynamo and advocate for your design team. So thank you very much.
Should be an example.
Yeah. People at the back are going like this. So I'm afraid we don't have time for wider questions, but obviously the whole premise of a summit is that the conversation continues outside of this room. So please grab any of us to talk about that.
Our designer,
Stand up.
Arnold, is here, so you can also just check with him.
So thank you very much. Thank you.